The land stretched for miles without interruption, hemmed in by low fences and long-forgotten property lines. This part of Maine didn't ask much from the world, just silence and distance. That morning, silence blanketed everything in white. Jonah Holloway had lived in this part of the country for 13 years. A former wildlife biologist who'd stopped writing papers when he realized the wild didn't need citations, it needed guardians. His home wasn't picturesque. It was practical. A single-story wooden structure tucked beneath a thicket of pine and birch. His closest neighbors were 6 miles away. And that was exactly how he liked it. The snow had fallen gently overnight. By the time Jonah opened his front door just after dawn, it came up past his boots. The air had that stillness only winter could command. He stepped out with a cup of black coffee, squinting at the distant tree line. And then he saw them. 2 figures, low to the ground, cautious but steady, emerged from the shadowed birch grove. His breath caught in his throat before he could even think. A lynx and a bobcat moving together. Not fighting. Not pacing. Just walking. Side by side. In sync. It wasn't unheard of for the 2 species to overlap in these parts. But to see them together, like this, in harmony? That wasn't natural. Not in the scientific sense, anyway. They were older, larger than any juveniles he'd documented in the wild. The lynx moved with grace, paws barely making a sound in the snow. The bobcat, stockier and more deliberate, paused occasionally to sniff the air, like he was trying to remember something. They weren't afraid. If anything, they looked familiar. Jonah stood frozen as they approached, not fast, but with purpose. The lynx tilted its head, and something in its eyes made Jonah's heart beat faster. He stepped back inside and quietly closed the door, hands trembling. He knew those eyes. 2 years earlier, Jonah never sought to become a caretaker. In fact, he'd left that life.
The wilderness stretched endlessly, draped in a heavy white shroud. A fierce snowstorm swept across the frozen valley, howling through skeletal trees like a chorus of lost spirits. The world was locked in ice and silence, except for the relentless wind carving ridges in the snow. Within this frozen expanse, 2 tiny figures staggered forward, 2 bobcat cubs, barely old enough to fend for themselves. Their paws sank deep into the drifts, each step heavier than the last. They were all that remained of their family. Their mother had vanished days ago, taken by hunger or the unseen jaws of death. Now, the cubs fought against a merciless storm, their fur matted with frost, their bellies hollow from days without food. They huddled close, trembling violently as they pressed on toward a ridge that loomed like a wall against the storm. The elder cub raised its small head, scanning for shelter with eyes glazed in fear and exhaustion. Then, through the haze of swirling snow, a silhouette emerged. At first, it looked like another rock, a shadow in the white void. But then it moved. A towering figure stepped into view, powerful muscles rippling under a tawny coat that shimmered even beneath the gray light of the storm. A lioness. She was far from her usual hunting grounds, a lone wanderer who had claimed this remote range after leaving the plains behind. Her breath formed clouds as she exhaled, and her golden eyes gleamed like molten metal in the storm's gloom. The cubs froze. Instinct screamed danger, for this was a predator beyond compare, a ruler of hunters. But hunger and fear can twist instincts into desperate gambles. The smaller cub gave a pitiful cry, a sound torn from a throat raw with cold, and staggered forward. The elder hesitated only a moment before following, their tiny paws leaving a wavering trail behind. They stopped just a few feet from the lioness, their bodies quivering as if the wind itself were shaking them apart. One of them, summoning every scrap of the.
It wasn't the kind of case most vets volunteered for, but this wasn't most terrain, and this wasn't a normal animal. The call went out to an independent wildlife responder with years of experience in rogue cases: malformed mountain lions, limping coyotes, owls with fused wings. But nothing like this. Nothing mythical. She arrived before sunrise, a compact woman in her late 40s with weather-worn hands and a stillness about her like rain waiting to fall. Her boots crunched the frost-hardened leaves. No one greeted her at the trailhead, only the wind through pine needles, and that feeling that something was watching from the treetops. She went in alone. The forest changed quickly the deeper she went. What began as golden light through fading trees turned to blue shadow. The canopy thickened. Birdsong fell away. Only her breath and the soft shuffle of her backpack remained. She moved carefully, every footstep measured. If the bobcat was injured or sick, startling it could mean losing it forever. There was no trail now. Only signs, a faint paw print near the creek's edge. Tufts of fur on a low bramble. A scatter of rodent bones. She paused at each one, piecing together the map the animal left behind, not just where it had gone, but how it was surviving.
The lioness led them through a narrow cleft in the rocks, where the wind's roar faded to a mournful whisper. Inside, a shallow cave opened like a dark mouth, its floor lined with dry pine needles swept in by countless storms. The bobcat cubs stumbled in and collapsed in a shivering heap. The lioness followed, her great paws silent as whispers, and lowered herself beside them. Her body radiated heat like a living hearth. For the first time in days, the cubs felt something other than biting cold. One pressed against her flank, then the other, their tiny frames sinking into her golden fur. She rumbled softly, a sound deep as distant thunder, and draped her tail across them like a blanket. The storm outside battered the world in vain. Inside the cave, there was only warmth and breath and the faint crackle of frost melting from their coats. Night fell heavy and long. Hunger gnawed at all three creatures. The lioness had not eaten in 2 days, yet she made no move to harm the cubs. Instead, when dawn broke in pale shards of light, she slipped out into the frozen silence to hunt. The cubs stirred fitfully, their eyes opening to the emptiness of the cave, and whimpered. Hours later, she returned with a hair dangling from her jaws. She tore the meat into strips, pushing morsels toward them with her nose. The cubs ate ravenously, their tiny teeth flashing. She swallowed last, only after they had their fill. Time passed in strange harmony. Days blurred into nights. The lioness hunted tirelessly, bringing back scraps for her unlikely wards. The bobcats grew stronger, their steps steadier, their cries louder. They began to follow her outside the cave, trailing behind like shadows as she moved through the pines. She watched over them with a vigilance that defied the primal laws etched into her blood. But the mountains were never safe for long. Other predators roamed, wolves with ribs sharp as knives, driven mad by hunger. Their howls began to lace the night air, closer each time. The lioness listened, her ears pricked, her muscles taut beneath her tawny hide. The storm had passed, but a darker trial loomed. The first wolf appeared at dusk, a gray phantom slipping between the trees. Then another, and another. Soon, the shadows moved with many legs and many eyes. The pack had caught the scent of blood and weakness. They circled the lioness's domain, snarling low, their breath smoking in the bitter air. The bobcat cubs huddled behind a fallen log, their eyes huge pools of terror. The lioness stood alone between them and the encroaching ring of wolves. Her head was high, her golden eyes blazing like twin suns. She loosed a roar that ripped through the valley like a thunderclap, scattering snow from the branches. The wolves hesitated, but only for a heartbeat. Hunger makes bold creatures bolder. The alpha lunged first, fangs bared, and the lioness met it with a crushing blow that sent it sprawling. The night exploded into chaos. Jaws snapped. Snow churned crimson under claw and fang. The lioness fought like a storm-given flesh, her muscles rolling beneath her coat as she struck, leapt, and tore. Wolves fell, writhing, but others surged in their place. Teeth raked her flanks, blood streaking her golden fur. She moved like fire, but even fire burns low when hemmed in by the dark. Realizing the fight could not last, she made a choice, a final, desperate gamble. With a roar that shook the marrow of the mountains, she lunged at the nearest wolves, driving them back, clearing a path toward the river gorge. Then, with a glance over her shoulder at the cubs, she bolted, drawing the pack after her like sparks after a comet. The bobcats crouched trembling in the silence that followed, listening to the receding echoes of snarls and roars. The forest held its breath. Then came a sound, a man's voice, low and urgent. Walter Hayes had tracked the storm's wake for hours. As a wildlife ranger, he knew these mountains better than most men know their own souls. Yet what he stumbled upon that night would etch itself into his bones forever. He had heard the roars, the frenzy of wolves, and followed with rifle in hand, not to kill, but to end needless suffering if he could. He found the lioness by the riverbank. She was down, her massive body crumpled in the snow like a fallen banner. Blood marred her tawny coat, steaming faintly in the cold. The wolves were gone, driven off, scattered, but at what cost? Her sides heaved, her breath ragged. When Walter approached, she lifted her head, golden eyes locking onto his. Not with fear, not with rage, but with something older, deeper, a silent plea. Then he saw them. Two bobcat cubs, crouched a few feet away, their small bodies quaking, their eyes huge in the moonlight. They crept to her, pressing their faces into her blood-matted fur, mewling softly. Walter felt something shift inside him, something that no law of nature or man could name. He knelt. Snow numbed his knees, but he did not care. The lioness turned her gaze to him one last time. Her breath hitched, then stilled. A stillness vast as the winter sky settled over the gorge. Walter reached out and laid a trembling hand on her head, whispering words that dissolved into the cold air. He stayed there long after her eyes dimmed, long after the wind rose to carry the scent of pine and blood away. By dawn, a grave lay beneath a sentinel pine, the earth carved from frost by human hands. Walter lowered the lioness into the hollow, her body shrouded in the stillness of eternal sleep. He set a smooth stone at the head and carved no words, only a mark that spoke to his heart alone. Then he turned to the cubs. They blinked up at him, fragile sparks of life cradled in the palm of a merciless world. He gathered them in his arms, feeling their tiny hearts beat against his chest. And as he walked down the mountain, the first light of morning spilled over the peaks, painting the snow in fire and gold. Behind him, the wind stirred the branches of the sentinel pine, whispering a song only the wild could sing, a song of sacrifice, of love beyond the laws of nature, and of a lioness who gave everything for two trembling bobcats.